Welcome to Spotlight on Schools. We focus on Rochester City Schools. I'm your host, Jim Strauss. This week is part 2 of our series on Great Schools for All, a Rochester organization that sprang out of the concern among a group of city Presbyterian churches over the state of Rochester schools, but has grown to be much more. Our guests, again, are co-conveners Lynette Sparks and John Wilkinson. As interim associate pastor of outreach and evangelism at Third Presbyterian Church in Rochester, Lynette Sparks oversees the congregation's extensive outreach programs in the areas of education, hunger, homelessness, and advocacy. She is actively involved in Urban Presbyterians Together. John Wilkinson has been pastor of Third Presbyterian Church in Rochester since 2001. He has been a member of many boards and is an active participant in Urban Presbyterians Together in Rochester. Welcome back to Spotlight on Schools.
Thank you.
Last week we talked about the genesis of Great Schools for All, how it sprang out of Urban Presbyterians Together. You spoke about your study of areas of the country that had addressed the type of concentrated poverty that exists in Rochester. For those who weren't watching last week, please tell us, first of all, who is Great Schools for All? And second, what is your goal?
Great Schools for All is a community coalition of volunteers, 100% volunteer-led effort to reduce the concentration of poverty in our schools in the city of Rochester. We've learned from research that when the concentration of poverty gets above 40 to 50%, the mere fact that that concentration of poverty exists in a school starts to impact a child's ability to learn. Mm-hmm. We want to reverse that.
Mm-hmm. Add to that, John?
No, so our goal very simply is to deconcentrate poverty to enhance achievement and support families and helping their children learn and thrive and grow and live into their potential.
Okay. You had a number of ways that you've approached that. One of the things was that you had was a November conference. Tell us about what led up to that and what were the results?
We had done some study of the issues of poverty as it relates to children's performance in school. We sent 11 people through a grant from the Rochester Area Community Foundation to Raleigh to interview a whole bunch of people there in the ways and the techniques that they used to create schools that were socioeconomically diverse. We went to learn what lessons could be applied to Rochester and to bring those back.
By way of background, let me just interrupt. Raleigh and Wake County, about 30 years ago, dissolved their individual school districts and made it one. It was a countywide school district that has had, much to many people's fears, much to their surprise, have had remarkable results.
They have, and so we know that our Rochester situation is different. We have 19 different school districts. We have legal barriers that make things very difficult. But we think there are options, especially after going to Raleigh. We came back not only inspired but personally transformed to take on this issue because we didn't see it being addressed anywhere else. And we really believe that for our children to succeed, we need to level the playing field. And that's going to require a broad community coalition of not just educators, but business people, faith community leaders, the entire community across the board, urban and suburban, to come together to address the needs of our poorest children. Because we know that it's an academic imperative, it's also an economic imperative. We saw in Raleigh the economic impact of good schools, and we saw neighborhoods turn around, and we saw new developments in neighborhoods that had previously been in significant decline. We all bear responsibility for what happens in our community going forward, and we want to do our part in taking that responsibility.
So, in November, you had a group that came up from Raleigh to present what had happened there. What else occurred in November?
We presented what happened in Raleigh, what we learned there. Professor Kara Finnegan from the Warner School of Education at the University of Rochester gave a white paper on a continuum of policy options for impacting change in educational outcomes. Anything ranging from improving current schools to adopting place-based approaches with wraparound services to cross-district cooperation and transfer of students, all the way up to a broad regional planning strategy. So Kara set the stage for that, and then we broke out into groups from all of the participants so that we could get their feedback on where we as Great Schools for All should prioritize our efforts. And out of that feedback from those breakout sessions, we formed 6 working groups to look at specific options. And we asked these working groups to sprint for 60 days, learn as much as they possibly could in that limited time window, make their best recommendations based on what they could in that point in time, and then that we would come back together and get feedback and see what might be doable and what might our next steps be.
Deputy superintendents were. In that area,
how do we allow maybe a school that is fun, have some time together that's fun?
It could be, and one of the
sons in the 50s who had the privilege.
There are some amazing teacher leaders and other educators, so.
I have a list here of those work groups. They are Summer Learning Work Group, Urban Suburban Program Work Group, Countywide Magnet Schools, Regional Planning, a Legislative Work Group, and an Outreach and Diversity Work Group. These committees work together, and they came together for a May conference that happened. We're going to take a break now, and we're going to cut to 3 different interviews from that conference. The first is with Jeff Crane, who spoke about the Urban Suburban Program.
The Urban Suburban Program is important because it's one method of providing great opportunities for all kids in the greater Rochester area, amongst many ideas that we're hearing here today at the Great Schools for All conference. The program currently has 7 school districts involved in it, and as I mentioned earlier today, we are one of 8 interdistrict transfer programs in the United States. We're the oldest, but we're also the smallest. And so we hope, and we've been successful in expanding the program for September of 2015 to 5 more suburban school districts. And we continue to talk with the remainder of the 19 suburban districts to not only expand the urban to suburban piece, but also we're working very closely with the Rochester City School District as they reboot some of their programs to reinstitute part of the program that hasn't been as successful as the urban to suburban. That's suburban to urban, and we are definitely getting some interest from suburban parents about possibilities.
Some people who have been critical of the Urban Suburban Program in that they say it siphons the best urban students out of the urban areas. What do you say, how do you respond to that?
Well, I certainly understand that feeling, and we're sensitive to that. Please know that we're currently, we have just, I think, 580 students involved in the program out of what I understand is almost 30,000 students. We leave 1,000 applications unanswered each year through the interview process in all of the school districts. So even if we had all 19 suburban districts involved, what we look for are commitments from families, not the kids with the 4.0 averages. We look for kids who want to be part of our school districts, and even more importantly, parents who understand the support that is necessary and the partnership that must occur between the school and the home for successful academic achievement by all students. And that's the key. You must have that partnership. And when I used to interview as the principal of Irondequoit High School, I was looking for a kid and a family dedicated to that effort.
There were some problems recently in Spencerport where there were some parents who fought. One of the things in the presentation today, your colleague talked about the elephant in the room. Would you talk a little about that?
Sure, Jim. Unfortunately, fear of the unknown, a lack of the total view of the picture, will sometimes cause people to verbalize those fears. That still occurs in districts that have been involved in the Urban Suburban program periodically. And we have to make sure people understand what else I mentioned about the data. You know, you have 7 districts that have the proof of years and years of participation where, let me call it this way, residents and non-residents, I'll say it that way, are graduating at the same high rates. So I was glad that the discussion occurred at Spencerport and other districts most recently. We knew that those discussions would have some of those reactions due to a lack of knowledge and fear of the unknown, and I believe districts have overcome that. And once they see what we've seen in the 7 districts that have been participating for many, many years, I think that it will become just the norm of the day. And let me say this, the kids involved don't have a problem with any of this. The kids are fine, the kids are tolerant, they understand that diversity is important in their lives, and they are welcoming not only for residents but non-residents, and they welcome the experience. And I hope that we can start to have some suburban to urban interest in the Edison school, which is something that the school is working very hard on. The P-Tech program that they're working, the East High School, there are numerous places where the city school district is working diligently to provide their students, their residents, and possibly some non-residents, if space allows, the opportunity for great programming. That's ultimately our goal, so that the adults in our greater Rochester community walk the talk. And if each child in this community, this greater Rochester community, belongs to all of us, then all of us have to come together to provide the best opportunities educationally for all kids. That's our mission, really.
The second interview is about countywide magnet schools with Dan Delahanty.
My name is Daniel Delahanty. I am a teacher at East High School in the city of Rochester.
And what is your role here?
I was one of the co-conveners, which means I led a group of researchers and social activists researching the question of countywide magnet schools.
And what is the role of a countywide magnet school in deconcentrating poverty?
Okay. The purpose of a magnet school is to deconcentrate poverty and also address the inherent issues of racism. The school is actually socially and economically constructed in such a way that the student body does not exceed a 40% threshold of students that are coming from families in need. And research has shown, particularly from the work of Dr. Gerald Grant and Dr. Richard Kallenberg, that schools can get overwhelmed when their student population brings with them all the different obstacles of poverty. If you go over 40%, the school isn't able to handle it. A magnet school will make sure that the population of the student body is sufficiently integrated so that one benefits the other. We'll be bringing together people of different races, cultures, and economic means. We'll be designing a curriculum that has them learning from one another, celebrating what is part of their own origin and self-identity. And at the same time, they're going to be educated in a curriculum that is special, that's unique, that's a draw, that actually helps to create not just a student identity, but a community identity. I think that the ideal would be to locate a magnet school somewhere along the borders of the city and the suburbs. But it doesn't have to be that way. We have schools that are in the city that are magnet schools, but they are limited by law to only a city population. Charter schools, with only a few exceptions, are again limited to the city population where their charter was enacted. But we could draw from the suburbs if legislation made it possible. The great magnet schools that we have in the city include School Without Walls, the World of Inquiry School, the Wilson International Baccalaureate Program with its rigorous education, And then there are a number of special programs throughout the district. One that I'm very proud of is the one that I work for, the Teaching and Learning Institute, which grooms future educators.
And that's at East High.
And that's at East High School. And we want to bring students back to the city and become teachers. So the magnet programs are there. I think also we've learned that parents are interested in dual language elementary schools, that they're interested in accelerated programs in elementary schools. And at the high school, they're interested more in the arts and music or STEM programs, science, technology, engineering, and math. I also think that a communication school, one that focuses on the media, and we're talking everything from web design to television, radio, and storytelling, from the journalist perspective to a fictional perspective, would also be a great draw.
Something like expansion of the School of the Arts.
Absolutely. And the idea of the magnet school is to say, let's look at the schools that are working and replicate them and put them in different points around the county. And if a school has a waiting list, it must be doing something right. Let's learn from it and make sure that that replicated model has an urban-suburban mix.
Okay, as a result of the workshop today, you identified 3 issues. Can you tell us what they were?
The 3 issues that were raised, I think these were very important and need to be pursued further. First is early childhood education. The magnet model should probably include from birth to pre-K, because so much learning happens in those first years. You want to make sure that when you start elementary school, a child is ready. So perhaps we should direct some of our efforts to the early years of childhood. Secondly, there was the issue of exclusivity. We got to make sure that everyone has access. And English language learners in particular can be left out of the equation if we don't make the effort to reach out. And that means the families that have recently immigrated to the city of Rochester. It means people who speak Spanish or another language, in the home. We need to reach out to them. And the last issue is legislation. We need to know what is the legislation that will allow us to create the countywide magnet school. We have a group that's ready to advocate for it. We want to know what the legislation looks like, and then we're ready to go.
The third interview is with Mark Hare, leader of the legislative work group. Talking with Mark Hare, longtime Rochester columnist and writer for the Rochester newspapers. Can you tell us your role in this organization?
Yes, I can. I'm actually retired from newspaper work now. I retired 3 years ago. So equity in education has always been something I've been interested in. So I joined this group, Great Schools for All, probably a year and a half ago. And so I'm on the convening committee, and as I think people are beginning to know now, our single focus, or our chief focus, is really to figure out ways to integrate schools across Monroe County socioeconomically so that we have a mix of middle class and lower income students.
Mm-hmm. And your committee is which committee?
I'm working with a group, the legislative subgroup, which will be proposing a fairly comprehensive legislative plan by later this summer.
Mm-hmm. And you've chosen as a target date September 15th. Why that date?
The September 15th deadline is just to give us plenty of time to shop this proposal around, to let people review it, comment on it, and to have some additional meetings with state legislators and regions to make sure that by the start of the 2016 legislative session, we're ready to go.
Okay. And I realize you're collecting ideas right now, but are there certain ideas that you see you can carry to the legislature that will have more legs than others?
Well, there's certainly some pretty basic things that all efforts around the country seem to come to when it comes to trying to figure out a way to socioeconomically integrate schools. One you've heard this morning is magnet schools, countywide magnet schools that would be available basically to any student in the county. And they would be, the student populations would be capped at approximately 40% low income, which is kind of a key factor. That's one aspect that probably will almost certainly be part of this proposal. We already have the existing Urban Suburban program in Monroe County. We've had that for 50 years. I could see some work towards expanding that, trying to get it to be more suburban to city as well as just city to suburb.
Is that the kind of thing that will need legislation in order to expand?
Well, the Urban Suburban program allows now for suburban to urban transfers, so that does not need legislation. There may be, I don't know yet, if there are other changes to the program, that could require legislation. Unclear yet whether that will happen. I would think there might be some contractual possibilities that would allow districts to contract with the city or vice versa to provide some services that don't now exist. That probably would require legislation as well. There could be school-to-school exchanges or partnerships. That probably would require some legislation. The whole mix of things is not completely clear yet, but those kind of broad outlines are very likely to find their way into a proposal, I think.
Okay. I want to ask you a couple of questions about an article that you wrote, What Can Rochester Learn from Louisville? It was an article you wrote on April 13th, 2015. Here's a quote that you wrote. Governor Cuomo, the State Education Department, and the Board of Regents have endorsed efforts to achieve socioeconomic integration across district lines. I didn't know about that. What have they done with regard to that?
I wouldn't call it the most powerful endorsement in the world, but the governor's second inaugural address on January 1st recognized in very clear and stark terms that we literally have now two different school systems, one for the rich and one for the poor, and that if you're in the one for the poor, you're going to have a very hard time succeeding. Within that same week, the state regents and the state education department both made a point of saying that it's time to consider ways to integrate socioeconomically our schools in New York State. It wasn't a very detailed suggestion, it simply stated that principle. And as a result, the state education department has asked several urban districts to submit demonstration ideas, projects that they could begin to work on that might attract a mix of suburban students into their areas. So in Rochester, I believe there are now 3 proposals pending in Albany. I'm not sure of all of them. One of them would involve a bilingual program, another one would involve a technical education program, and I'm sorry, I can't remember the third one now, but those proposals are pending. And so when I say that they're aware of this, I mean it's pretty hard not to be aware of it. If you've looked at the research at all, and they certainly have, they know this, and there are some indications this year that this is kind of on the agenda.
Okay, these are grants that are pending. Okay. Later on in the article, you say this: Albany and the entire education research establishment knows that New York's failing schools cannot be fixed without integration. You say they know that. So what do they have a stance on integration? Are they going to leave it to the local governments to fix?
Well, I think the fact that they are now suggesting that we can have demonstration projects for socioeconomic integration means that they're at least aware that the state needs to get involved in that. I think the solutions themselves will have to be worked out on the local level. I mean, we're only talking about integrating local populations of students, so how do you do that? Will that be the same kind of a model that Great Schools for All will be talking about? I'm not sure. There could be other possibilities, but I think the implementation will have to be worked out on the local level, and it will have to involve the consent and the enthusiasm, I suppose, of all the local players, the school boards, the teachers' unions, everybody who's involved.
Welcome back to Spotlight on Schools. We're talking with Lynette Sparks and John Wilkinson of Great Schools for All. We just talked about the May 2015 conference. Now let's talk about what's next for Great Schools for All.
Well, thanks. So we took that event in May and got feedback from the 200 people who were there and others who couldn't be there, and we continue to invite feedback. And then we've worked on a kind of a year plan. So we'll take those work groups, reconfigure them. We're working on this 60-day at a time process. People are going to rotate off. We're bringing new people in. Anybody who wants to participate, and we'll talk about that at the end, can do that, and we'd encourage that. So we're looking at kind of 4 areas of work right now that we're really focusing on for the summer. One is to continue to diversify and expand and broaden those who are participating across the board in our leadership and in the work groups themselves. Another is to continue to hone and work on the legislative proposals. We work on the schedule that needs to get things into people's hands and feedback, whether they're legislators or appointed officials, so we can really get the best kind of legislative proposal in front of people according to the state cycle of doing things in the state calendar. We want to do some things that we think can work, but we also want to stretch and expand the possibilities of what people can think about. We want to continue to meet with all the different groups who in Rochester and the county are working on education. Collaboration is not just a kind of a cliche for us, but really is a mode of operating, and we're meeting with people all the time. Lynette and I and others are talking to individuals and groups almost every day about what this effort is and how we can learn from them and how they can learn from us and how we can work together. And finally, we want to really think about summer, because we've learned a lot about summer, including learning loss in those weeks and months kids are away from school, and how that really is an important time. And also it feels like a victory that's possible for us because it's not requiring any kind of legislative change to make progress on summer learning efforts, whether they're cross district boundaries or within districts. So we think there's lots of promise to do some things around summer quickly and effectively while we're working on the longer term legislative and continuing to build the conversation and the movement.
It's an interesting challenge as we work on this effort to keep movement going, to keep kind of breaking it up into manageable pieces so that we can continue to make forward movement, but yet keeping that long-term goal in mind of deconcentrating poverty in our schools so that all children can learn, and because we know that they're capable of it, and to create an environment, where our wonderful teachers and administrators and support staff can thrive as well. With concentration of poverty so high in schools, it just stretches resources so thin, and we really believe that the community needs to be part of this whole solution. This summer in particular will be a mad sprint in terms of coming up with a legislative proposal, because we know that many of the kind of options that we're talking about require, would require a change in state law or certainly a carve out for Monroe County. And the other thing I would say is that our efforts to reach a broader and broader circle of the community and to bring more and more diverse constituents into our leadership and into our organization, that's very labor-intensive work. It's very relational. It is one-on-one across the table with a cup of coffee, listening and learning, and that's probably in some ways, at least to me, feels like the most daunting piece, and yet it's also the most transformative piece.
Well, if anyone's watching here, and I hope you are, tell us how we can get in contact with you.
You can check out our website, gs4a.org. Clever, huh?
That's good.
And or you can email us directly. We answer emails personally, and you can email us at contact@gs4a.org.
Okay. Who's handling your Twitter account?
That's a great question.
Well, tell us what it is.
Well, you've got it written down there, Jim.
GS4AROC. Facebook, GS4AROC. It's on your screen. Please get in contact. If you want someone to come and talk to you, talk to your group, please have them contact through the website. There's a lot of information at that website. You can spend hours on that website just going through all the data and also the most recent updates from there. Well, I'd like to thank you both for joining us.
Thank you, Jim, very much. Our pleasure.
Thank you, Jim.
And we would love people to get involved. There's
Absolutely.
a place for you in this conversation and in this movement. Thanks.
Thank you for joining us. Come back next time for Spotlight on Schools. Good night.